Right, we'll kick things off here. Thanks everybody for joining today. Excited to see this presentation and be a part of it. Glad you're here for managing media in large scale Drupal websites. I like any topic around large scale sites because there's always lots of challenges. And like to welcome and thank Mario Hernandez for presenting today, doing this. Mario is the head of learning at MediaCurrent with over 10 years of Drupal and front-end development experience. He's a regular speaker and trainer at tech conferences across the country and is also the co-host of MediaCurrent's Open Waters podcast, where he discusses open source solutions. So Mario, I'd like to welcome you here. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping kind of for the session. I think people are kind of used to some of this now that I guess it's our third session block, but welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Trop. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for joining us and sticking around until the last block of sessions. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. It's a topic that I've given before, but it's one that I feel that is really critical to understand. And I know there is a lot of people at different roles, developers, site builders, content managers, who struggle with fully understanding how to manage images, right, in an efficient way on your Drupal or any type of website that is. So I hope that this session will bring you some insight on how you can improve that process for your project. A quick overview of the agenda. And let me, before I get too deep into it, let me quickly turn off my video so that we can get a great recording for our session real quick. Can I go here? Let's see here. So going to turn off the video and let's get back into it. All right, here we go. So the quick outline for today is we'll talk about how to take inventories of images before you really start managing your images, and that is a very important process to take into account. Then planning for images, how are they going to be used throughout your project? That is critical if you have a full understanding on what the expectation is from a images point of view. We'll talk about the different ways in which we serve images on our websites, one of those being art direction, and that considered the exception and not the rule. We'll go into detail about that. Along with that, we'll be talking about the picture element or the picture tag, which is the default approach to take when using art direction. And we'll define what art direction really is shortly. Then we'll talk about in details about image styles and responsive image styles, how to ensure that you're creating image styles that are reusable, that give you the outcome that you need, and how to avoid creating too many of those, right? The idea is that to be able to create reusable image style so that you can in turn end up with less of them to manage. And that makes it a lot easier to manage than when you have so many of them. Not only creating reusable image style, but how to properly name them, right? Part of making reusable image styles is to make sure that your names don't restrict you on where to use those image styles. So we'll go into some principles on how to achieve that. Then we'll go through a quick demo on taking all of this knowledge and applying it to a Drupal site and ensure that we are serving the right image at the right time for the right device. And finally, we'll go into some QA. A little bit about MediaCurrent. Our people are impelled to constantly improve technology for our clients. And our mission is to bring together the most talented team members to provide world-class solutions for the web. My name is Mario Hernandez. I am the head of learning at MediaCurrent, and I have over 10 years of Drupal and front-end experience. I am a trainer and speaker. We are doing quite a bit of training workshops lately, and if you are looking to level up your team or yourself with any topic, whether it's Drupal, Gatsby, accessibility, SEO, or anything else, we have the curriculum, we have the talent and material for you. So make sure that you reach out. You can reach me at mainly Twitter. That's where I'm the most active at Mario Hernandez. And yeah, I look forward to connecting with some of you. So why this talk? I briefly touched on this just a few minutes ago. And properly managing images on your website results in performance improvements, among other things, right? So that's the main goal here, is to make sure that you are managing your images in a way that your performance is not compromised. So the image and media in general really are a critical part of a web. And if you noticed, at least 2 of the last 3 sessions that I just attended today are all about images and media. So that tells you how critical this is, and knowing how to properly manage those assets is really a critical part of a development process, really. And it's not necessarily something that is dedicated. There's a dedicated role for this, right? Some things may fall under a front-end developer role. Some may fall under a back-end developer role. Some may fall under site builders. So who is this session for? So as I said, site builders is a big part of group of people that can benefit from this knowledge, being able to apply these principles to when building your site. Your Drupal site can really improve the way your Drupal behaves and performs. Developers is very critical for developers to understand how to manipulate images, how to know when to use one technique or another, depending on what you're trying to achieve. And finally, content managers can greatly benefit from these principles, and they should really demand that the systems that they work with have a system in place that is efficient for managing media and images in particular. So the objective is to make sure that that you know how to serve the right image, right, all the times. In addition to that, there are ways in which those images will be served on your website, and so it's important to understand what those methods or ways are. And finally, is to effectively manage image styles and responsive image styles, which in a Drupal website, it becomes kind of the main way of ensuring that images are being rendered the way you expect them to be rendered. So the first thing that I really like to do before I jump into a project where I know I'll be managing images is, before I start creating any image styles or responsive image styles, or start assigning parameters to the way I want images or containers where the images will go, is I want to take a quick look at, if I'm fortunate enough to have design assets available for the project, I go through every page of the design comps, and I take a look and understand, okay, what are the requirements for images? How will images be used on this project, right? Can I identify any patterns? Are there images that I see are, repeated in the way they are rendered? For example, one of the first thing is what kind of aspect ratios are being used on a project when serving images, right? If I see that I see a lot of square images or 16:9 type of aspect ratio or any other type of aspect ratio, that is a clue for me that I can take that information and then create image styles using aspect ratios rather than using specific dimensions on images, because that will allow me to make those image styles a lot more reusable than if I'm creating one-offs type of image style. So the goal is to avoid creating one-offs. The goal is to create image styles that are general enough that you can reuse them on any page, any part of your site at any time. And we'll go into more detail about how to do that. So as you can see, these few mock-ups that I'm showing here, these are projects that I've worked on, and they're image heavy, both of these sites, right? And so how do you ensure that what you are building as an infrastructure for your images is going to provide you the type of not only outcome that you see here, but also the flexibility to ensure that your image styles are being properly managed on the project. So if you are fortunate enough, if you have the luxury to have design comps in front of you before you start a project, I would say go through them very, very carefully and take note of those patterns, right? What are the most common aspect ratios being used? What are some odd requirements that you see on images that when you look at images, not just the way you see it here, but you say, okay, how is this image going to be rendered on mobile, tablet, or desktop? Is that image going to need a specific attention to be able to achieve that rendering requirement, right? There may be times when an image is not going to, work the way maybe a designer has thought about, have that image being rendered. And that's something that you may want to hopefully be able to capture ahead of time so that you can call this and raise a flag indicating that, there is an issue here that we may need to address before we dive too deep into managing these images. There are areas in which sometimes there may be a designer who is not fully aware that their images or dimensions of images that they are specifying on their designs are not a traditional type of dimensions, as far as rather than using aspect ratios, they're using specific dimensions. And there may be times when, there may be an image that is maybe a few pixels short from achieving a natural aspect ratio dimension, right? And in those cases, what I like to do is I like to go back to the stakeholders or the designers, say, you know what, I noticed this image is this size, but if we just add or remove just a few pixels, we can actually make it this aspect ratio instead. And that'll make it a little more flexible, and it'll allow me to create responsive images that are reusable. So don't be shy to speak up when you see things like that, because that is going to make you your life easier, but at the same time it's going to make the client, right, the stakeholders' lives easier, because they'll end up with less things to manage when we are able to create images that are reusable. And you notice that the theme here is being reusable, and that's the goal here, because from this screenshot that you see here, I can see that a lot of these images are 16:9. So I can literally just have 2 or 3 image styles for these entire pages that you see here, and that will probably serve well, rather than creating individual image styles for each of the images that you see here. Here's another example where the same concept goes, right? The hero image that you see there, those are typically one-offs, right? Typically hero images are very unique, and sometimes there is no way around those. But for everything else on the pages, like what you see here, I'm seeing 16:9, a set of cards here. They all use 16:9 aspect ratios, and just having one image style for this type of requirement here can really help me a lot. And I don't need to worry about creating so many of those. So image styles, okay? So what are some of the best practices for creating image styles that are reusable, that you'll get the most out of them, right? Naming things, by the way, is hard, and that's probably the one thing that I see the most being and struggle for people to overcome, is how do I create image styles that are not limiting in where to use them, how to use them, right? Because creating an image style with a name that indicates that it's a homepage or it's a news article or something like that, that is limiting, right? You won't be able to use that image style in any other page if it's not the homepage. Technically you could, but it's going to look odd, and it's going to look like maybe it was misused some way. So take full stock of your entire images, as I said before, if possible. If you have that luxury of having design styles or design cops available, take advantage of that. Take some time to look through those and identify patterns, identify issues that may come up with how some images are being identified on your designs, and also take advantage and you might be able to identify opportunities for how to use images properly. So whenever possible, build reusable image styles, not one-offs, right? Aspect ratios are your friend. So as much as possible, if you can, use aspect ratios, because those will help you a lot. And as I said before, if there's an image that is not quite the aspect ratio that you wish it were, bring it up. A lot of times, almost every time that I brought up something like this to a designer or a client, they say, yeah, that's fine. Let's make it that aspect ratio instead. And you want to explain to them why, right? Because at the end, it's going to make it easier for them to manage a lot of those assets. Use descriptive names on your image styles, but not directly associated with specific image or pages on the site. And always, use multipliers to be able to address, high density screens, retina screens. So here are some examples of naming image styles, right? And as I said before, naming things is very, very hard. And this may not even be the right names. If you look at them, you may have other ideas. That's okay. But this is a bad example here. So the image style, the human readable name will be homepage article image, right? And then the machine name will be homepage underscore article underscore image. And you may say, well, that's a good name. Well, but if you think about it, it's really vague because it's homepage article image. What does that mean, right? It really lacks a lot of the aspect ratio or dimension information. So you don't know how big this image style is. You don't know what the aspect ratio is. An article, is it what type of display on the article? Is it a teaser? Is it a full node article? We don't know. And it's very restrictive, right? Because it says homepage. Just that word in itself is saying this should only be used on the homepage. And it should only be used on article node types. So that is very, very restrictive. So an example of maybe a different way for naming this same type of image will be something like 16 by 9 max 720 pixels. So this can be used across your entire website, right? It is not limited to where this image style can be used. It's not associated with any type of page or type of content, right? And is giving you a lot of information. It's telling you that it's a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. So that's a big clue. And that the maximum width of this image is 720 pixels. So you know that you can use this image anywhere where these requirements are met. So anything that is 720 and below, you will be able to use this image anywhere on your entire site. Here's another bad example. Homepage, or it says home image thumb wide. Again, too big, too restrictive. It just lacks a lot of information that it doesn't tell you much about this. And when you think about names, it's not just the human readable name, but if you think about if you're a developer, right, and you are inspecting code and you are looking at code and you're seeing this kind of name, it really doesn't give you a lot of information when you're debugging a piece of code, right? And if you see this image style being used on a page that is not on the home page, then you say, well, somebody made a mistake. And maybe they didn't. Maybe they meant to use this image style on that page because it met the requirements, but the name itself makes it look like it was wrongly used. Instead, we can use something like this, 4:3 max 300 pixels, same idea, right? This tells you that it's a 4:3 aspect ratio that is a maximum of 300 pixels. And now you can really tell whether you're using it, looking at this visually on the page or you're looking at it through a code. You can tell exactly what this image style is, and you can determine whether it's the right one or not to use based on the requirements. So that's for image styles. Again, the principle is try to make it much reusable as possible. Try to make sure that they're not restrictive, and really you're gonna end up with less of them to manage, which is the ultimate goal. Now let's talk about responsive image styles, right? Responsive image style is not the same as image styles, right? So the way I like to see responsive image styles, they have specific naming conventions that I like to use. It looks like here I forgot to update. Yeah, so let me change this bullet points. So the idea here is that naming responsive image styles is different than naming image styles. As you saw, image styles are named based on dimensions, aspect ratios, the maximum width, that kind of thing, right? So image styles are named more for the specifics of an image, where our responsive image styles are mainly named in a way of the use case. How are they used? Where are they used? So that they can be clear, defined, right? So I like to think of responsive image style as a bundle or a bucket, right? Where you drop image styles. In this example here, we have 3 image styles, all with common attributes. And we can put them all in the box, and that becomes a responsive image style. So then on our fields, on our image fields or media fields, then we can customize those so that we can say, instead of individually assigning image styles to those fields, we say, apply this bundle of images to this field. So that way we are providing a set of sources for each of the image fields. So again, if this helps me visualize, the image styles are individual things that you can name and create per specific needs, but the image styles are things that you will use in in a use case, right? As an example, let's say the namings are not as strict, right, for image styles. And so here's an example, a bad example of a responsive image style will be homepage, gallery, images, and some kind of number there, right? Yeah, there's a lot of information, and it probably gives you a lot of detail, but it doesn't need to be that way, right? Because let's say if this bundle that you created for image style is intended for a gallery, a photo gallery, then why not use that name, right? You can call it image gallery or gallery, so that when you are setting the parameter on your image fields, it'll be easier to understand, okay, what image styles are included here. And so it's easier to name responsive image styles that way. Like if you're creating a responsive image style for your hero images, the responsive image style name could just be hero. And that is very clear and straight to the point, right? So here is, for example, the same example there where we have a specific 16:9 aspect ratio images. And then at the bottom, we created an image style called gallery. And so that that although that responsive image style name is called gallery, that within that we have images that are 16:9 aspect ratio. And that really simplifies things for you. And it's okay to create multiple image styles, because responsive image styles is okay that you create multiples for different scenarios. And those are not very hard to manage, right? The ones that are really hard to manage are the individual image styles. So those are the ones where we want to create more generic, more reusable names. So one of the things that I mentioned before is, understanding how your images will be served on your project, right? There are two ways. One is art direction, and the other one is resolution switching. And the resolution switching is the most common way in most cases is used. That art direction is kind of the exception. Art direction is basically when you are looking to crop an image differently at different breakpoints. So think about this picture here, for example. If you look at on larger devices, we can see a lot of this picture, right? We can see the background, we can see more of the water. As the devices start getting smaller, we are selectively choosing what areas of this picture is the most important. And so once we get to the mobile device, you can see that the most important piece of this picture is the person, right, on the water. And so that's what art direction is when you need to be able to specify a specific cropping area for your image, right? And for everything else, you would just use what's called resolution switching. And so that is what we're going to be going over today. And let's talk about art direction very quickly. So here is an example. When we're dealing with art direction, we're actually using what is called the picture element or the picture tag. And I apologize for the ambulance. And so the picture tag is what allows us to be very selective as to which images to use on every situation, right? Like if we have a mobile device, we can tell the browser, use this one image. If we have a tablet device, we can say, use this other image. And if we have a desktop, we say, use this other image. So as you can see here, there's a couple things going on here with the picture element. There is a media attribute where you can specify, what those parameters will be. In this case, we are saying if the maximum width of a device is 720 pixels. So meaning if this device is 700 pixels or smaller, we are providing a source set of two images here. One is called mobile, and the other one's mobile 2x, which will be double the size, right? The next source is we're saying, okay, so if the device is instead 1200 pixels or smaller, so this will be basically between 721 and 1200 pixels, right? That will be the range of the second line there. And so in that case, we're saying if that is the size of this device, then let's provide this tablet and tablet 2x image. And at the end, if none of those criteria are met, meaning in this particular example, if the device is bigger than 1200, right, like 1201 and above, then the desktop image will be used. And so that's what these lines of code mean here. And ultimately, if for some reason the browser lacks support for the picture element, which there is an issue still with that, then a regular image tag will be provided. And in this case, we can opt to use whatever image we want in that. And this will be mobile. in this particular example. So that's one example of how to use the picture element. Here's another example where we've switched going from maximum width to minimum width here. I personally always like to use minimum width whenever possible, because that allows me to carry on anything that I've done before to bigger devices. In addition, when you are working with the picture element and art direction in particular, the browser will use the first parameter that it meets, that it fits the criteria. For example, if in the example here, notice how we first listed the mobile device image when we use the maximum width here, right? So we're saying if the device is bigger than, is 720 and smaller, use the mobile device. The reason we did that is because if we put the desktop image on top first, let's say we're saying if the device has a maximum width of 1900 pixels, as an example, right? If a mobile device comes to our website, that mobile device is going to fit within that range of 1900 pixels, because it's definitely smaller than that, right? So then that mobile device will be using that desktop image. And that's not what we want, right? So that's why we are starting with the smaller device possible, because in this example here, a desktop device is not going to be able to fit on that 720 pixel parameter that we have there. So that means it's going to jump to the next. It's going to say, is my device 1200 pixels or smaller? Nope. It's going to go and jump to the next, and then it's going to use the desktop image. So that's very critical to understand, is that even if the parameter that your device may be matching is not correct, it will still use that. The browser will still use that image, and it will not let you change it. So if we were to put the desktop on top and we use a mobile device to browse the website, then the browser will make sure that the mobile device uses the desktop image, and that's not good. So that's why using when we use minimum width, like what we see here, we're going the opposite direction. Notice how now the desktop is on top, because we're saying here, if the device is at least 1200 pixels, right? That means 1200 or bigger, right? Then use the desktop image. Now, right? So because it is at least 1200 pixels, if I go and come with a mobile device to this scenario here on a page, then I know that my mobile device is not at least 1200 pixels, right? It's going to be smaller. So it's not going to use that desktop image. And then the next parameter is if the device is at least 720 pixels, then use the tablet image. So this will be between 720 and 11, right? 99. So it'll be so for the tablet. And then finally the mobile. So again, it makes a difference whether you use minimum or max width, and what should go on top or the bottom. And we will see this in more clear when we look at Drupal, how Drupal handles this to ensure that you are providing the right image to the right device. So this is the picture element. And so here is what the Bartik, breakpoints.yaml file looks like. By default, it provides 3 different breakpoints: mobile, narrow, and wide. And if you notice here, the mobile starts first, and look at the weight value there. The weight is what determines that order that I was just talking about, is which item do we want to first display or display last, right? Depending on whether we use the minimum width or maximum width. And then you see 1x and 2x, and those are multipliers for regular screens and high density, high definition screen, right? So those are things that you can add to your breakpoints. So this is only necessary, by the way, when you are using art direction and the picture element. And we'll see in an example shortly on how that works. So as I said before, there's still some issues with the picture element. Not all the browsers support it, right? You can see that IE 11 still doesn't support it. Lucky for us, within the Drupal community, the responsive images and breakpoints modules, they come with, at least the responsive images comes with a polyfill called picture fill that closes that gap of support, so you can safely use it on your project, right? So But if you were to use this on a different project, whether it's not Drupal, you may need to add that polyfill yourself by hand. So where's that gap, right? Why are we then, using the picture element? Because using the picture element is only necessary, again, if you're doing art direction. You should not use the picture element if all you want to do with your image is change, scale it down or up while still keeping the same aspect ratio, right? You should not use the picture element in that situation. And we'll go into more detail about that. But there's an issue here by telling the browser which image to use. And the example that I always like to use is by using the picture element, I'm telling the browser, if the device is this small, use this image. If it's this size, use this other image. If it's large, use this very large image. So imagine I'm working with my laptop, right, which has got a Retina screen, and I'm working at a place where the connection is super, super bad, really, really slow. The browser is not going to care about that. The browser is going to say, well, your screen is pretty big and it's high definition, so I'm going to give you the biggest image possible, right? So that's a problem, because now I'm ending up with a large image, even though my connection is super, super bad. And so that's a problem. So there are things that we as developers know when we do development, and there are things that the browser knows when rendering a page or an image, right? So the first variable will be viewport dimension. Do we know what a user's screen size is going to be when viewing our website? We don't, right? So we need to kind of figure out how to address that. But the browser does. The browser knows exactly when you go to type the URL for a website, it will know exactly what that browser width, the viewport width is, right? Do we know as developers the size of the image relatively to the viewport width? Yes, right? Because if we were looking at those design comps that I showed earlier, we know exactly how big the image should be rendered as, right? But the browser doesn't know that, right? Before the browser can know what the image size is, it needs to have JavaScript and CSS loaded on the page, so it knows, right, how big the image should be. But before then, it doesn't, so it will try to grab whatever image it can find, right? The screen density, do we know what the screen density of a user machine will be when viewing our website? We don't, but the browser will know that as well, right? And finally, do we know as developers what the image size is? The physical image size in megabytes of the image that we're uploading. We do know that, but the browser does not. I'm sorry, not the megabyte, but the dimensions of the image that is being uploaded. We know that, but the browser does not. So that's a gap, right? So this is the reason why we're telling the browser which image to use, because it doesn't know what those are, what some of those information are when using the picture element. So that's something to keep in mind, because we will then talk about how we can close that gap, right? And so the next way of providing the best image on a website is to use switch resolution, right? And this is the most cases when all you want is just change scaling the image up or down, changing the resolution of this image, then this is the way you should do it. And bottom line is basically this does not use the picture element. So we will take a quick demo in a little bit on when to use which, and there are times when your picture element is the best way to go, right? But you try to avoid that as much as you can whenever possible. So in this example here, we have an image that all we are doing here is we are just changing the scaling of the image, right? But we're not cropping it in any special way. We are keeping the exact same aspect ratio of this image. And so in these cases, which is the most cases for most of us, right? All we do on our images, on our website, sometimes all we want is the image to scale up or down. And so for this case is when we want to just use a plain old image tag, but not just any image tag. There are attributes that we can now use on the image tag that allows us to take control on the type of images that we want to provide, how we want to render them, and then we let the browser do the job. And that's the difference between the source set and sizes attribute and the picture element. And the picture element, remember, we're telling the browser which image to use at each breakpoint. And that has some advantages, but for the most part, when it comes to performance, it could be disadvantages, right? But sometimes there's no other way around it. With this here, with the sizes and sources attribute and the image tag itself, now what we can do is rather than telling the browser what image to use, we can say, hey, browser, here are all these images, and this is how big they are, and this is how I would like them to be rendered in relation to the viewport. You pick the one that you think is the best and render it, right? So that is a lot better than telling the browser what to do. So how do we do that? Well, here's an example of what that code looks like. So we have the sizes attribute. Sometimes you will have a media query, in this case, minimum width of 720 pixels. And then you have a viewport width value there, 50, which means 50%. So each viewport width point is 1%, right, of the viewport width. And then comma 100 VW, viewport width. So what does that mean? Well, using this media query within the sizes attribute, we're telling the browser, okay, if the device is at least 720 pixels, render this image at 50% the width of the viewport width, right? Otherwise, comma, right? Render the image at full width, 100%, meaning that if the image is 699 and smaller, the image will be rendered full width. So on mobile devices, this image will be rendered full width. And then, so that's the first part of the sizes, right? This is what we're telling the browser, hey, here is how we want this image to be rendered. If the device is this small, do this image full width. If it's a little bit bigger, or if it's this size or bigger, render these images at 50% the width of the browser. And then we provide a set of images, right, on the source set. We say, okay, we have a small JPEG, which is 720 pixels width, right? So we're telling the browser how big the images that we're providing it are. We have the medium JPEG, which is 1200 wide, the large JPEG, which is 1900 pixels wide. So this is where we're closing that gap that we just saw earlier, right? So in a visual example, with that code that we just saw there, on a mobile device, this image will show full width, like you see there, and on a larger device, it will show 50% width, right? Now, there are times, and this is typically when you're building hero images, is that you may want the image to always render full width on all devices. So in that case, you don't need the media query that we had there before. You just tell it the sizes is 100% viewport width, meaning that for all the devices, this image will always display in full width. And we still provide the same type of images on our source set there. And in that case, our image will always be full width. So now we're closing that gap that we had before. So now, if we look at this again, we say, okay, as developers, do we still know what the viewport dimensions will be? We don't know, but the browser knows that, right? And does the browser now know what the image size relative to the viewport is? Now it does, because we're telling that through the sizes attribute. The screen density, the browser already knew that, but the image dimension itself, how wide is this image? How many pixels is this image? The browser will know that through the source set attribute. So now the browser can make the best choice for saying, okay, I know all of this about this image. I know how big these images are. I know how big we want these images to be rendered on the page. I know the browser density, the device density. I know what the connection of this connection speed is on this device. So the browser will be able to pick the best image possible based on all that criteria. Right. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to document things for the client and for ourselves too. When I create all these image styles and responsive image styles, I like to provide this to the client so they know exactly how things are being used and they can continue to leverage that. So I put something like this, an example like this together, whether it's on Confluence or a spreadsheet. So, and we provide this to the client. We tell them exactly what we are creating as far as image styles, what their machine names are, dimensions, where to use them, what pages they can be used. And then we also do the same with the responsive image style. So that's very handy and something that I would highly recommend people do. So here are some resources that you will be able to get from the slides. So I'm not going to let you stay too much on this, but let me now do a quick demo. I know we are running low on time, so I'm going to try to do this very quickly. And hopefully we can still go through some questions. So the first thing is I want to start by showing how to configure images that all you want to do is resolution change, right? You're not doing any type of art direction or any type of special cropping. So the first thing is there are several modules you can use for a lot of these things, right? Responsive images and breakpoints modules, they come in core by default. Media comes in core, right? So the only thing you will need contriv modules for if you want to do some kind of special cropping. And there is a cropping widget that you can use where it lets you do a specific cropping styles or types where you can set up those parameters. We'll go over those in a minute, but let's go over some of the image styles that we have here. Drupal comes with a handful of image styles that are very well put together as far as the naming of them. So I created a few myself, anything that is 16 by 9, max 250. As you can see, this is kind of the naming convention that I was talking about, is I can use this anywhere on my site, right? Then I created some specific ones like portrait. And this is where I'm thinking, I want to use this when I want to display some images in portrait mode on mobile, for example. So this is what I've done. But before we get into that, let's take a look at what I've done here. So this is the image styles, right? And then for responsive image, and by the way, let me open a quick detail of this as far as the effect that I'm using. I'm simply just using a scale and crop and specifying the dimensions that I want my images to be cropped at, right? Nothing special about that. And so, but if I go to the responsive image styles, I created, I called it cover image. I couldn't come up with another name just because I wasn't clear what the plan for my content was. On a real project, I will certainly find names that make more sense, like hero, gallery, or things like that. So I created this 16 by 9 cover image style, right? And this, if you look here is where we are using the responsive images module, and we are using this option that says select multiple images styles and use the sizes attribute, right? This is the one that you use when you're not using the picture element. And here is that media query that we were talking about earlier. So in this example, we're saying if the device is at least 700 pixels wide, render the image at 50% the width of the viewport. Otherwise, render at 100, right? That means full width. And here are the image styles that I'm selecting. This is the equivalent of the source set attribute that we were just looking at, right? And finally here, I'm setting up a backup, and this could be any type of image, right? So that's what the configuration looks like. Notice that I'm not using breakpoints here. I'm not saying this device is this much or it's 2x or any of that. I'm just creating the image styles. But typically you will create image styles that are regular size images and should be also creating image styles for double the size of images. For example, you can see they have 2560 pixel image style. That is the double for this one here, for the 1280. And I'm just choosing them all. Basically, I'm telling the browser how big I want these images to be rendered. I'm telling it which images I'm using, right? How big they are. And the browser is going to do the rest. So if I go to one of those pages that I created, and I view this page here, so right now, this is showing me this image in 50% the viewport width, right? The viewport width of the entire browser width, right? Not just this content area, right? So that's why, so this is 50% of that. If I inspect this, you can see that it's just an image tag, but it's got all these like source sets, for example, and it's got all these different image styles that we selected. And then it's got the sizes. Where's the sizes here? Somewhere around here. Here is sizes. And I have that media query there. We'll say 50%, otherwise 100%. So right now it's showing me, and this is the browser selecting this image, right? From all the ones that I provided. So it's showing me that 50%. If I resize my browser, you can see that it continues to 50%. But once it gets to a certain point, now it's 100% width. You notice that there. So 50%, and then it jumped to 100 there. Again, if I inspect this again, now the image, notice that the image that I'm showing there, the browser says 450 pixels only. So, and if I view the image at this breakpoint, the image that is being used now is 894 pixels. Again, the browser is selecting the best picture possible for what I'm trying to do right there. So that's the example of using the regular sizes and sources attributes, which again is the most common way. Just one last example. I know we're running out of time, The last part is when I created crop types, I'm using the widget, crop widget, and I create a crop type for portrait. And all that is basically I tell it, you can specify an aspect ratio, or you can specify parameters on how big, how wide you want the images to be cropped at, right? The next step for that is I created my responsive image styles for that as well. And in this case, I called it portrait to landscape. So I'm going from mobile, I want to make that image portrait, and then on larger devices, I want to make it landscape. Now, here's the difference. I'm not using responsive images module here. I'm using the themes breakpoints coming from the breakpoints.yaml. And in that file that I showed you before, you can see that there's 1x and there's 2x for each image, for each breakpoint. So I'm basically selecting what images I want to use at each breakpoint. Again, this is the equivalent of telling the browser, what images do I want to use at each breakpoint, right? And that's all I'm doing here. At different breakpoints, I'm telling it, use these images, and in this case, display them at 100% wide, right? So, and the final step there is on my content type, if I go to the form field, here's the image. There's a widget through the module that you tell it what crop type you want to use, which is portrait. And finally, in the display mode, you can do per view mode. On the full view mode, I am using responsive images, and I'm using that responsive image style that I use called portrait to landscape, right? On teaser view mode, which I also create, I'm just using a plain old image tag. And for that one, I'm specifically using an image style. So let's first look at just a quick example here. So here is this here. I said that I want it to be 100% at all times. And if I inspect this, notice that now I'm using a picture element because I'm telling the browser which image to use at each breakpoint. So if I resize this at 100% landscape, right? When I get to a certain size, you notice that now it's portrait, and through the crop widget, I've selected which area of the image is the most important, and I've cropped it that way, and that's how I achieved that there. And again, this is all picture element, and I'm just telling the browser what to do. Here, I created a quick view for that. Again, on portrait, I wanted to display these small images per breakpoint. So that's the image as a portrait. Again, using the picture element. This I just used the image, so I didn't use the picture element on this because I was very specific about what I wanted there. But on the other one, yes, I was using the picture element to tell it that on large screen I want a landscape, on the smaller screen I want it in portrait. So sorry for going a little over the time. I hope that this was helpful. I don't know if there are any questions, but I would love to answer those if there are. If not, you can always reach me, and I'll be happy to help you out if I can.
Thanks for that, Mario. That's a great talk. Really enjoyed it. The only question that I had, and we can take it offline or later too, but is how would this apply, like for Gatsby? How much of this could I use? You know, if it's a fully decoupled site, can you still use crop and responsive and all these tools that you just demoed, but then have that render on a Gatsby front end?
Yeah, so the principles that we talked about, as far as picture element, sources, and size, those apply. Those are not Drupal specific. Those are for any type of website. So those will still apply. There are different ways in which how Gatsby handles this. I know Gatsby has the image sharp plugins, and it's got a couple other plugins that allow you to convert all these image styles, but it's still using those same principles.
Okay.
There are ways also in which you can actually leverage all that work that you've done in Drupal with image styles and responsive image styles, and you can pass that information to a Gatsby site. I don't have the specifics, but there are ways in which you can actually leverage all of that and provide it to a Gatsby site.
So you still
Gatsby does a really great job.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it sounds like you get the benefit of Drupal's content editing powers and still can pass it to Gatsby. That's fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, we don't have any other questions. Thank you, Mario, so much for this. This is great. You did go a little long, but we will forgive you because of the excellent talk. It's perfectly fine, and it was really
Sorry
good.
about that.
No. I think everyone enjoyed it. Yep, I saw somebody say it was worth it. Very helpful. So that's all you need to know. But thank you so much, Mario.